It is an incredible feeling to be a liberator. Russia doesn't need territory. It doesn't know what to do with its own territory. It's too big. There is nothing in Ukraine Russia needs so desperately to get engaged into such a mayhem. Russia wants to be an empire, and there was never in history Russian empire without Ukraine being part of it.
Maksym, been wanting to talk to you for a while. I'm so happy to meet you.
I'm happy to, and thank you very much for this invitation.
Yeah, so you're so interesting to me because you are, first of all, I'm so happy that you've been freed from Russian captivity after 2 years and 4 months. All right,
Exactly.
Last October, we're going to talk about that. But before that, you were a journalist. You worked at the BBC. You were a meteorologist at some point, from my understanding, and you also are a human rights activist. There's just so much to talk to you about, and so I really want to talk to you about you joining the military and what. Obviously it was 2022, the invasion, but you were anti-militarist, and I just want to understand how you came to the point where you say, I want to pick up arms and fight Russia.
Yeah, I'm asked about that quite often because there is an obvious contradiction, but surprisingly enough, I don't feel any contradiction in that for a number of reasons. In the first place, quite often I'm now mentioned as a pacifist. It's all a matter of definitions, anyway. So if it means that I'm saying I would never use I will never use force or violence under any circumstances, and this is what pacifism is to me, I'm not a pacifist then, because to me it's all then too theoretical. For instance, if you are present at the scene where a terrible crime is committed and you are able to help the victim, but the only option you have is by using force, and you don't do that just because you said, I would never use force, it makes you complicit. It makes you part of the crime on the side of a perpetrator. This is my belief, my deeply grounded, I would say, belief. And this was one of the reasons, actually, why I joined the Armed Forces of Ukraine in February 2022, because what we witnessed, apart from being attacked, invaded, it was a huge crime, which unfortunately continues while we are talking in its 4th year. And if I don't resist, if I don't help my brothers and sisters and compatriots and all people who defend their values and their loved ones, I become part of the aggressor, I become complicit, and the only mean to join the resistance was to join the armed forces of Ukraine. That was one of the reasons. Another one was that I was calling myself anti-militarist, and I still do, because I believe that the armed forces, the army, has a very narrow purpose, and it's too hierarchical. So to spread the military mode of thinking, mode d'emploi, upon the whole society, this crawling militarization which sometimes takes place here and there, it's a bad thing for me. On the other hand, there is an exception to every rule, and currently we live in one of those exceptions when it's not the armed forces, like professional military, but the whole nation resists the invasion, and the current Ukrainian armed forces are basically the mirror of Ukrainian society. The vast majority of our fighters are not professional military. They are former teachers and farmers and drivers and carpenters, and construction workers. I know that because I've been one of them, and I was a platoon commander, so I had 20 of my guys under my command, and I knew pretty well who they were and who they became. So in this fashion, I am anti-militarist by my convictions, but currently we are facing different situation. The main activity of my life for previous more than 15 years was was not work, because it was about human rights. It was about undoing injustice and trying to help people whose rights were violated or who were under threat of their rights being violated. This is why I can't call it work, because you cannot go to the office and do human rights 9 to 5 and then you go home and you leave human rights at the office. It doesn't work like that. It was at the very core of my life. We've achieved quite a lot in those years when it comes to human rights realm in Ukraine. Of course, less
I want to
than
talk to you about that later.
less than we wanted to, but still there is a huge progress. And I knew pretty well the human rights situation in Russia.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that.
It just I knew that if Russia prevails, everything we've done and everything I've dedicated my life to in previous more than 15 years would be just erased to the ground. And if I was called human rights defender, and to me it's quite an honorable thing to be called, I had the only option to defend human rights under those circumstances by picking up Kalashnikov rifle. It was the only option left, and this is what I've done.
Yeah, I'm curious about that time you picked up the Kalashnikov, because when the war first hit, I remember going around with my friend who also joined he joined territorial defense, and I just remember the scenes around the city and in the metropolitan in Kyiv, where the government was literally handing out rifles to people, and my friend was one of those people. Were you? Was that you as well? You just went to a center and you got your rifle and you joined a unit, and that's how your fighting started? Because I'm curious about where you first started fighting.
Yeah.
And, in those days where you decided to pick up that gun and actually go out in the action that you saw.
It was a little bit more complicated. In my case, I went to the call-up station in the evening of 24th of February, of the first day of the full-scale invasion. And I've never had an active military service experience before, leaving aside the combat experience, never had it. During my first degree, I've got supposed basic military training as a part of our curricula, but I'm afraid it was in 90s, so it was not last millennia, not only century, it was the end of last millennia. I'm one of those who are called in military slang jackets, pidjaki, meaning that this person is a civilian who for some unknown reason has military rank, but it doesn't reflect anything about his or her skills or knowledges. And also in 90s, this part of curricula was taught in really lame fashion. No one believed that it could ever be used. But I became an officer of the reserve. I became a lieutenant. So when I arrived to the call-up station and said, I want to join territorial defense, give me a rifle. And they said, we've run out of rifles. Okay, give me a shovel. I will just, dig or do whatever is necessary. They said, are you an officer? I said, well, yes, but it doesn't mean anything at all. They said, no. Officers should go to that office. And suddenly I realized that I cannot enter territorial defense, but am assigned to the armed forces proper. But they told me that they will call me day after tomorrow. They told me to pack my stuff. I said, all my stuff is with me. It's already packed a few days ago. They called me in 6 days' time, during which I tried to ensure that all my persons of concern, those whom I worked with...
what were you doing at the time? What was your job?
Most of my activities were focused on attempted assistance to refugees and asylum seekers. And most of them, those who came to me, at least to us, they were from former Soviet countries. So apparently they were under double threat if Russia takes over. They needed to be evacuated, and I tried to help them as much as possible. But in 6 days' time, I was called, so I arrived and was sent to a unit, which was a newly created unit in the process of formation. Apparently, a new battalion was set up specifically, as we realized later, for the situation of possible street fighting in Kyiv. If the enemy breaches our defense lines, we had to take part in street fighting. This never happened, fortunately, but at the end of March, we were sent to Kyiv Oblast, to Kyiv region, to reinforce our troops there, and we took part in the liberation of Kiev region, and that was our first battle assignment.
Can you describe, as somebody who didn't have any combat experience, what was it like dealing with the sheer horrors of war? Like, what are some of your memories from the liberation of Kiev? What were those for you?
As I realized later, most of us, or many of us, we were so ignorant about basic military things at the time, and we didn't really have time and resources to get a proper training. It was spring 2022.
So you didn't get any basic training before they sent you off?
No.
None?
Well, it was first month of the full-scale invasion. It was do or die thing.
Did people have basic trigger discipline and any? I could just imagine because a guy I was with in the territorial defense, he almost shot my foot off. So,
I can believe that. I can believe that. No, actually, our commanders, they tried to ensure that we get at least something, bits and pieces here and there. So there were occasional sort of lessons or training sessions with basically volunteer military instructors who wanted to show at least basic things like how to hold the gun, how to aim, what to do. But at that moment, there were what's quite often forgotten now. There were extreme shortages of everything, like shortage of fuel. There was extreme shortage of fuel as Russians bombed oil refineries and everything. There was shortage of ammo, basic ammo for Kalashnikov rifles. We were short of it. So we arrived to the shooting range and we could fire 11 bullets each. 11. And that was our shooting training, basically. But we watched a lot of YouTube. Apparently on YouTube there were a lot of training videos, and that helped quite a lot. And we've got excellent training, a basic one, but excellent at the time when it comes to tactical medicine. And that really helped later, of course. But yes, we were quite ignorant. On the other hand, in my unit, in my platoon, and I became very soon platoon commander, as I said, there were guys not only with active military service, but with combat experience gained after 2014, since the beginning of the war. And I encouraged them to share it, and they did. We had our own training sessions. And I didn't try to pretend to be someone I was not. So I told my guys, what kind of experience I have, like none. Some of you are in the same position as me. Some of you are more experienced. So please, let's share. And when we'll take decisions, if we have time, if it allows us to do so, we'll do it together. But of course, my word will be the last one because I'm your commander. I'm responsible for all of you. And so we did. From my previous civilian life, I realized pretty quickly that the only thing, or the main thing I could do, which could be useful under these new circumstances, was to care about people. And I had 20 guys under my command, and I tried to care about them as much as I could. I didn't know what kind of commander I was. I really want them to, those who are still in this world, of course, to share it with me.
So you lost some guys?
Of course. No, not under my command, but when I was already in captivity, they continued to fight, and they paid with their lives, several of them.
So I'm curious about when you were in this liberation of the Kiev Oblast. What was it like when you first saw your first combat for you? What was that like for you?
I knew by that time that one might think whatever about him or herself, but you never know how your body reacts when you come under fire for the first time, and then when you come under artillery or mortar fire for the first time, because sometimes human body can produce really paradoxical reactions. You might think of yourself as being a very brave person, and suddenly you're frozen and paralyzed with fear. Not fear like a conscious one, but your body realizes that it's on the verge of being destroyed. And the other people who said several times, I'm actually a coward. Under fire, they behave like incredibly brave heroes. So I was quite satisfied with myself, I should say.
Okay.
It was fine. It was fine. It was at our very first position. It is Zhytomyr Highway, which became known because it was direction of Bucha. And Bucha is unfortunately internationally known now. We never entered Bucha, but we took part in liberation of several other villages and towns in the vicinity. Yes, and then there was the first body I've seen, and it was the body of a local civilian killed by Russian tank fire.
Is this during the liberation or after the oblast was liberated?
It was during the liberation, yes. We entered the village, and we've seen it being semi-destroyed by Russian tank fire, and one of the civilians was lying in the middle of the street. I'm sorry to mention grim details, but what was worse was the picture of civilian cars clearly marked as civilian with white ribbons, evacuation, which were machine gunned by Russians, with human remnants still in them. And unfortunately, we couldn't get them out because they were in the gray zone between our positions and the Russian ones. But very soon, when we pushed them out, of course, they were dealt with properly. So these were first grim scenes I've seen. And then when we entered the villages, and some of them, we were the first unit, actually, to enter, after reconnaissance, of course. Then we entered, and local civilians met us. They very cautiously looked out of their yards and houses, and then they seen Ukrainian uniform. And they cried and hugged us. And it is an incredible feeling to be a liberator. It is. Because they said, guys, we are boys, we were waiting for you for the whole months. Boys, tell us they won't come back. Please tell us that they won't come back. And we gathered everything inside of us, what we could, and said, they won't. Do you promise? I said, yes, I do. Who is the commander here? I said, I am. Okay, so I'm promised by the commander that they won't come back, she shouted to the others, and they cried. We've seen villages being semi-destroyed. We've seen civilians being killed for no reason. And, of course, looting. Looting on massive scale was described to us by the locals, or we've seen the traces of it. So it gave very tangible idea what Russian occupation looks like on the ground.
That type of lack of humanity and just utter savagery, does that still stick with you to this day? Because I could tell I'm looking at you describe it, and even me, it affects me.
It is still with me. Of course, I at the time already knew that it is impossible to paint all even occupiers in the same fashion by the description of locals. Some of them tried to kind of be polite to an extent. Some of them felt quite uncomfortable being where they were, doing what they do. But the majority, or let's say on a systemic level, like looting took place on a systemic level. And it was not something that was needed for military purposes. In one of the villages, locals said that we understood when they took like washing machines or something, but we never can understand why they took on massive scale women's lingerie. Not the new one, like used one. They packed APCs, armored personnel carriers, with women's lingerie while retreating. So, these things, they are unimaginable. Or when they retreated and there was an old lady looking out of the window of her house, the last thing they've done, they shot from the tank at that house and killed her, of course. So these things, they stuck. However, there are different people there. I'm not talking about being good or bad, but this is also tricky because you never know whom you will encounter. And here I already compare with my experience in captivity. It's the same.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. How long did you all fight before you and your men were captured?
I was with the armed forces for 3 months and a half, but active fighting of that was about 3 weeks' time, probably 3 weeks' time. First, it was Kiev Oblast, Kiev region. Then we were sent back to Kiev. As far as I understand, they still needed us to kind of guard Kiev, and they also tried to pick up an appropriate task for us because we were created as quite specialized unit. So, fighting in urban environment, we had vehicles of this kind. We were provided with Citroën Berlingo, which is like minivan. Later on, I realized that it is positioned on the market as a vehicle for active family recreation, which was funny because it was active. It was family recreation. Family like unit was like a family. Recreation, well, I doubt it. And in the urban environment, it's great for its purposes, even military-wise. But in the countryside, of course, it's different due to different kind of roads and things. And weaponry also. The one which we had, it was for close-range contact. But in wide open, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. But in mid-June, we were sent to the east to reinforce our troops there, to Donbas. And first we arrived to Donetsk Oblast, governmental controlled territories. And then we received the battle order to move to neighboring Luhansk Oblast, to the village with a beautiful name Myrna Dolina, which is Peaceful Valley. And I said several times already to some of my counterparts, I really had this thought that it's a bad omen to go to war to the Peaceful Valley. It is very picturesque, this village. It is really beautiful. It is that part of Luhansk Oblast which is beautiful. Well, it was, because apparently at least half of it was destroyed in front of my eyes by Russian artillery, and I'm afraid that the rest probably was gone after we left it. And these are steppes of Donbas. So no close contact. It was very different environment. By that time we knew more already, military-wise, but we were not very useful under that situation. Basically, as far as I understand, one of our tasks was to reinforce our troops, which covered the tactical retreat of Ukrainian forces. And while we still had connection, on our way there, we've seen the maps updated on hourly basis, and we've realized that we are going through the bottleneck, basically, into the territory which is controlled by Ukrainian troops, but almost completely surrounded by Russian troops. And my guys asked me, what do I think about it? And I said, well, someone's got to do that. Maybe it's us. We've got an order. But for some reason, I've never met anyone in captivity later on who thought about being captured. We thought about being killed or being injured. These are two major risks any military person goes through, but there is a third risk, which is captivity. For some reason, we didn't think about captivity, but it happened.
So tell me about that moment when you were actually captured.
When we came to this beautiful village of Peaceful Valley, it went under constant barrage of Russian artillery, constant mortar fire for the whole night. And then there was a pause, but then it resumed. When we entered the village, it was a village. When there was a pause and we came out, half of it was just moon landscape, basically, and ruins. But we were ordered to move to the observation point a couple of kilometers outside of the village and observe possible enemy troops. Or Russians tried to cut the strategic highway at the time. Observe and report, not to be engaged into combat without specific order. And we had to move there from under heavy mortar fire, so we couldn't really collect much of our stuff. And we've run out of water very soon. The scouts, reconnaissance guys who led us to the point, said that they will come back with other troops for other points nearby, and they will bring us more water and more ammo. and they never came back. Within a couple of hours, all our communications were lost. They were presumably jammed by Russians. We still stayed there for the whole night and morning, and then a lot of vehicles and people moved into the neighboring forest. At first we couldn't see them, we could just hear them. Then we realized they spoke Russian, but half of my unit spoke Russian, so half spoke Russian, half spoke Ukrainian, but then we could hear the accents, and these were Russians. And then we finally saw one of the armored vehicles marked with the symbols of so-called special military operation. And I said, okay, guys, it's time to go. We were without water for almost 24 hours by that time, and it was really hot, summer of 2022, especially in Luhansk Oblast. It's always very hot in the summertime. So we had to leave. We could not report anything. And suddenly one of the fighters of the neighboring Ukrainian battalion came on our waves on radio, the first person in almost 24 hours, and he said that the whole area is encircled by Russians, surrounded by them. The village is taken, which was true, but they didn't close the circle yet. So if we move fast enough by indicators he mentions to us, we'll be able to escape together with him. And this is what we've done, been severely dehydrated already, and I really was worried for my guys because some of them were young and fit, but most of them were my age or older, and also with quite a lot of health problems because, again, at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, no one really bothered about medical checkup. And when we moved to the destination point, we had to cross this vast field to the forest on the opposite side where he was, this guy. And we did. And when a few dozens of meters were left to get to the forest, he told us over the radio that we should stop and said, guys, I'm terribly sorry, but since last night I'm in Russian captivity. And if you don't lay down your arms right now, you'll be eliminated. And we've seen Russians moving out of the forest, pointing their guns at us, just to make them visible. And we stood like targets in the shooting range, basically in wide open. There were a lot of thoughts very quickly crossing my mind, but I had 8 of my guys at that moment under my command, and I was responsible for them. I wanted them to live in this situation where we couldn't defend anything. We couldn't even get a proper fighting. And I ordered to lay down our arms. And this is how we were captured.
That was a tough decision.
It was.
Had to be.
Well, the understanding that we were basically duped, we were lured onto Russian positions. When you feel yourself being overplayed by the enemy.
Yeah, because he was telling your guy those things because he was already captured.
Yes. So they played with us, and also didn't know. No one knew what to expect in captivity. Of course, we knew that no nice things can be expected, and I know that the only actually thing some of my guys thought about when it comes to captivity was that they would rather kill themselves. I didn't think so about myself because it goes against my beliefs, but there was a momentary thought that I would rather, stay there, but not to go into captivity. But it just came and was gone, among other things, because I knew that any sharp move or any sound, any shot would make them kill everyone on the spot. And I really was responsible for these 8 guys whom I dearly loved and still do.
That's just a lot to think about. Like, just first of all, this idea of ending your own life. And then also to have the wherewithal to think, okay, even if I respect your wish, even though it's against my values, you do it to yourself. What about the other people who don't want to? Like, you had to think about so much, not only in that moment, but in that intense situation. You exercise clarity of thought that most people could only imagine to have.
I was really surprised, all these tales about your life passing in front of your eyes in the risky moments. I didn't have that, but that stream of thoughts was extremely quick. It just took I think, a couple of seconds to think all these things over. I was surprised actually that I was able to do that. Also because in this state of severe dehydration, before that I've seen some of the guys almost fainting, and I felt that at some moment. But I think it was mobilization of the whole, of my whole self in those seconds. And so yes, so we went into captivity, and apparently the Russians, and these were Russians, they were not collaborators, they were Russians. I think they were happy that they escaped firefight, so they didn't really beat us or anything. They gave us water straight away. Of course, they robbed us of anything they liked. It's like national sport, as far as I can see it. But they treated us not in the worst possible way. Later on, I was in captivity with guys who were captured in different locations under different scenarios, and some of them started to go through hell from the very first moments of captivity. We were lucky, but we experienced different treatment later on, deeper in the rear, in Russian-controlled territory. Those soldiers and officers specifically, they were not at the front line, but they were more cruel.
What, describe that?
Of course, the most memorable situation to me was at the point where we spent the night on our way to Luhansk. We didn't know where we were going, of course, no one told us. We were just shipped from one point to another, then trucks changed with our hands being tied. And of course, they went numb. There was a lot of pain. They went numb. Sometimes they tied our legs. Sometimes they tied our eyes. Then we reached that spot, undisclosed location, and there was the officer, the Russian officer. All the soldiers and officers there were wearing balaclavas, and that gave us hope that we won't be executed, because we weren't sure. They didn't want to show their faces, so maybe they intended to keep us alive. And there was this commander who started to humiliate every single POW. By that time, we were joined by a few other captured Ukrainian soldiers. So apart from me, 8 of my guys, there were a few others, but I was the only officer, and I was commander for most of them. So he paid special attention to me. And he tried to show off as smarter person, as more intellectual. For instance, he learned that one of the soldiers in his civilian life is a child psychologist. And he said, okay, then explain Sigmund Freud's concept to me about subconscious. Probably you can't. Okay, what about Soviet psychologist Makarenko? I can tell you, Makarenko said that those kids who misbehave, you should teach them with a stick and a carrot. And this is what we'll do to you, because you are sick. You think you are Ukrainians? This is sickness. You'll be corrected. We'll use more sticks. Sometimes to some of them, maybe a little bit of carrot. Then he started to provoke soldiers. For instance, of course, we were all kneeling in front of him with our hands tied behind our backs. And he asked, who is married? And of course, most of the guys were. And he said, okay, where are your wives now? And they said, well, in Germany or in Poland. And he said, okay, do you know what they are doing now? And he started to describe in sick details, using, of course, extremely foul language, how, basically scenes of group sexual violence committed towards these guys' wives by local men. And this was the first moment when I thought, you have so much problem in your head, man. You are sick. The next day, the next morning, two Russian military propagandists arrived, and they talked to us, made first videos, and they told us to say that we are treated properly, we are not beaten, we are fed, we are given water. It was all true by that time. I was beaten for the first time in a couple of hours after they left. And I was beaten by this particular officer. He entered the room. Of course, we were again all kneeling by his order, and the Russian soldiers. He said, we will start to learn Ukrainian history now, because we don't know real Ukrainian history. He took out his mobile phone and started to recite what seemed to me like Putin's address about Ukrainian history. And then he pointed at an individual POW who had to repeat the paragraph he recited exactly word by word. And if he confused anything or had a slip of tongue or paused, I was beaten with a wooden stick against my shoulder. Because I was the only officer, and I think also because he disliked me personally, I was too polite and too calm, and I couldn't be provoked, but I stood my ground when he asked stupid ideological questions. So I was beaten for any guy's mistake, and they really tried hard not to give him reasons, but of course he's found them. And at some point I realized that he stopped reciting, and what he said was more like a word salad, and his eyes went misty while he continued beating, and I realized that he gets physical pleasure from the situation of physical violence towards other human being, that he is a sadist, like a proper one. And I realized that I'm going to faint, because it was it was really painful.
He was just hitting you in your shoulders, or
on my shoulder, on the very same spot all of the time. It was quite professional, At the same time, even with this kind of behavior, he knew what he was doing. It was an exact spot, and I said at some point, "You are going to break my shoulder," and he said, "No, I'm not. I know what I'm doing." And really, if he continued a little bit to the side, he would break it. But that was the place where it was painful, but the bone stood untouched. And then he was joined by some others who were beating me already in front of the truck, because we were taken out and loaded onto a truck and taken to Luhansk. But before that, he took a mobile phone and told us to shout "Glory to Russia," all of us, and filmed it for his own collection, probably, because that video I've never seen online. Not yet, at least. So there were people like him. There were others who treated us like enemy fighters, but still fighters. There were people who have shown like soldier to soldier attitude. So they were different, but he was in command at that point. And those who were kind of more human, they were his subordinates.
Do you think that they were playing good cop, bad cop with you guys to psychologically fuck with you?
A little bit of it, because also I understand that this beating in particular, it was directed not only at making us scared or making me suffering, but he was showing that they can do whatever they like to us, that they are not really restricted. What Russian propagandists who visited us before that told me straight away, you think you are POWs, you are not. Because at the moment you just disappeared in the battle zone. When you reach a destination point, you'll be registered, then you become POWs, and then Geneva Conventions will start to apply to you. In the meantime, you just disappeared, and if you misbehave, if you don't follow orders, you might never reappear again. And if you don't believe it, let's have a walk to the backyard, and we'll show you a hole in the ground where the remnants of those who haven't got it, you can see. I didn't want to have this walk, of course. But they lied in one particular instance. We reached destination point, we were registered, but Geneva Conventions never started to apply to us. Never. Russians don't follow international humanitarian law. when it comes both to POWs and to civilians in captivity. I think there was not any single clause of Geneva Convention 3 on treatment of prisoners of war which was not breached when it comes to our situation.
I'm just, you were saying that, yeah, you were definitely tortured, but you were not tortured as badly as other people, because I've seen photos. There's one infamous photo of a guy whose elbow was just completely broken and just bent in a very contorted way. And you also see a lot of Ukrainians who lose a lot of weight because they're not fed. Comparatively, when you see Russian prisoners of war, I saw one video of a group of guys. They were normal weight, and they were energetic and upbeat, and they ran into their bus onto either the Russian occupied territory. Yeah, it had to be Russian occupied territory. And it contrasted against the Ukrainians, who were half alive. It was just a sharp contrast.
Right. Yes, I'm saying every time, just to do justice, that I was quite fortunate when it comes to torture, and I was beaten just a few times. But for instance, application of electric shock, they never applied it to me. They've threatened me with it. They've shown me the dynamo machine they usually use for these particular purposes, but for some reason at the last moment they decided not to use it against me. While other guys, some of them, they suffered from application of electric current. And the same comes about beating. I was in captivity with guys who were taken prisoners of war, being badly injured, but who were, apart from it, badly tortured while taking captives. So on this, I'm fortunate. And of course, we all lost weight, a lot of it.
How many kilos did you lose?
A little bit more than 30. That was the only period of my life when I was happy that before the beginning of full-scale invasion, I was quite overweight. Because, I was like, okay, I still can lose weight. And I did. But before the beginning of full-scale, I had 106 kilos. Upon my release, it was 73. Mm-hmm. But there was a moment in time when I had even less in captivity. There was a moment in time, and in first several months we had constant feeling of hunger, constantly. We were hungry. We were fed 3 times a day, but the portions were so small and the food was so bad.
What was the food?
Different kind of, like kasha, porridge, but really lame. Sometimes there was what they called salad, which was usually 1 spoonful of rotten beetroot and a little bit of boiled fish, or something that reminded us of a chicken, but it was just 2 bones and skin and nothing else. And for lunch, you also had prison soup. In slang, it's balanda, which is like pretty bad. And the bread. Bread was sometimes with sand and dust.
Sand and dust.
Yeah. Later on, it improved slightly, and in the colony, in the penal colony, when I was transferred there, it was much better. It was really much better, but the first several months it was pretty bad. And also, it differed in prison of Luhansk what they fed Ukrainian POWs with and what they fed people accused of criminal offenses. When I was sentenced by the so-called court on fabricated charges of war crimes, and I was sentenced to 13 years of strict regime penal colony, I was transferred to the other part of the prison where those accused of criminal offenses were held.
And this is in occupied territory? Did they put you on Russian
territory? In occupied territory. Okay. All of the time I was held in occupied territory. And supposed criminal offenders were treated much better, of course, than Ukrainian POWs, and they were fed better. They had different diet. apparently. And there was totally different treatment. And then when we were transferred to the penal colony, it was again different. But there was one thing in the colony which was negatively different from prison. Everything else was better, but in the colony we were forced to work for free, of course, not like Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine, who are paid for their work. This work took its toll. Some of it was quite backbreaking. I should say probably that I've seen actually Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine. I've been to one of the camps. It was not easy, but I wanted to compare, as you might imagine, because back in captivity we talked a lot about how Ukraine treats Russian POWs. And I wanted to make sure that my worst case scenarios or my best aspirations are true. And I was so happy to see that they are treated in accordance with international humanitarian law. I was really happy about that.
Yeah, I am. So I'm kind of looking at things like when did you finally tell me about the moment where you were released? Because I assume that you were convicted under their court, and you have no conscience of, hey, will you ever see freedom or anything? But when you actually were told that you were going to be a part of a prison swap, tell me about that moment that day.
On one hand, everyone in captivity has their moments of ups and downs, and there were moments when every POW started to think we'll never be released, we'll just rot here, or we'll serve all our 15, 13, 20 years of sentence. On that, I was fortunate as well because I never had that moment. There was never a minute when I doubted that I will be released, because I put all my trust in people out here, in my loved ones, in my relatives, in my friends, in my colleagues. I just knew innerly that they think about me, that they talk about me, that they fight for me, and they wait for me. The only other option for me was that my health might not be good enough to last as long as it's needed to be released, but it's also a way out.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, but I thought that all other guys would be released, and I would be one of the last ones, frankly speaking. So on one of the days, on 17th of October, after the morning checkup, me and my brother-in-arms, Serhiy, who actually was badly tortured really before that, we were taken to the guards' duty station, and they told us that we have to gather our stuff and be ready for transfer. They said transfer in half an hour. And when I asked transfer where to, they said we don't know. Which was probably a lie, but they never told us. At the end of the day, no one told us that we are going for an exchange, for a swap. So we had three versions. One was hospital, because Serhiy's health really started to fail him. And I had quite strange, but 2 weeks before that, I almost passed away during the evening checkup. So I had to go to the hospital. But we weren't sure. The other option was that we are taken to Russia proper. There were constant rumors that they will start taking us to Russia from the occupied territories. And the third option was swap, but we kind of prohibited ourselves to think about it.
Because you didn't want to get your hopes up?
Exactly. So then we were taken basically in a prison van to another colony and joined by other prisoners of war, non-convicted ones. This is when we started to think it might be a swap, but again. And then after quite long way, there were more Ukrainian POWs packed in our van really tightly. They also tied our hands and our eyes with a stick tape. But put back in the van, we couldn't really move. There was not enough air to breathe. And at this position we spent night, evening, night, and morning. We already knew that this is a swap because we've heard the engines of the planes. We understood that we are in the airfield. And one of the POWs knew where we are. It was in Rostov region of Russia. And of course, they didn't give us any water or food for the whole day and night and morning. No, nothing at all. And then we were loaded onto a plane, taken to Belarus, and then hours on a bus. The first meal, actually, they gave us there. And before midnight, we've seen Ukrainian flags. And
what's that moment like for you?
It was incredible. It was incredible. But I think also, as we thought we were going for a transfer, we packed our stuff. If we knew, we would leave it, of course, to the guys. And it was quite heavy, two heavy bags. I had already by that time mostly letters, actually, which were sent to me in last several months of captivity when we were allowed already to receive letters. So paper, which is heavy. And the road, 1 day and a half, was quite tough, as I described. So we were so exhausted by the moment when we've seen our flags and our guys that this happiness came in waves. It was like first realization, and then it was we were glad, and then we were happy, and then we started to realize that we are on Ukrainian territory, and then we were taken deeper. I think it was a good thing because if our realization that we are free and we are in Ukraine came all in one, that would be difficult to bear. It was too much to digest. But we were happy, of course, and speechless.
So how many guys roughly were you with? Did some of the guys that you went to captured with, did they come with you?
No, unfortunately not. None of my platoon was convicted, sentenced. I was the only one who, in their vision, deserved to have a criminal case fabricated against. So all the others, they're just in POW camps they were in POW camps, but some of them were released before me. They were in swaps. Overall, apart from me, 4 of my guys were released. One of them, unfortunately, later on was 200, killed in action, paid with his life, defending us. And the other 4 are still there. And every swap, of course, I look through the list of names, looking for them. And later on, in prison, they put me from one cell to another. So I met several dozens of Ukrainian POWs and also of Ukrainian civilians who were put in prison, either on criminal cases for their cooperation with Ukrainian authorities or under so-called preventive arrest. It means that there are no charges, no accusations, but these people previously either served in Ukrainian military or in national police or were part of local self-governance structures like village councils. They could be put under so-called legislation of Luhansk People's Republic, which was still active when Russia annexed the territories. They could be put in jail for 3 months and have an extension of that for another 3 months and another 3 months. So basically they were held incommunicado indefinitely with no charges and no accusations, but what makes it even worse, their relatives didn't know where they were. And when they requested information from these occupation authorities, they received the response, we don't know. So effectively, these people have been disappeared. They are desaparecidos, people who are disappeared, and you couldn't know what happened to this person until you find yourself in the same cell with him. So there were civilians there. And later on in the colony, I was held with 40 plus convicted Ukrainian prisoners of war. The majority of the colony's population were sentenced for criminal offenses, mostly locals. Some of them professional criminals, some just run-time, run-place guys. And later on, we were joined by civilians who were convicted for cooperation with Ukraine. So it was a mixed, and we were all held together, of course, like slept, ate, worked together.
It has, listen to you talk about the people who are convicted. Is it almost as if you want to be convicted because you stand a better chance of being swapped? Or does it matter?
This is what they told us initially. You'll sign a confession and we'll convict you very quickly as a war criminal, and you'll be exchanged in 2 months' time. That was a carrot, and the stick was literally violence, physical violence. Most of the guys, they were on the same assembly line. Their cases were from the same assembly line as my case. Absolutely absurd accusations. But they were forced to sign a confession under duress. I really like this expression, under duress. It avoids the word torture. My first interrogation on a criminal case, which lasted for about 4 hours, it was a forceful one. They basically explained me my options, what happens if I refuse. And there were 2 options. One was that if I refuse, they will just take me out and shoot me as someone who tries to escape. But probably they won't even bother. They'll just put me in a cell with inmates who cooperate with administration and who will make my life live in hell. And I will curse every morning and every night my decision not to cooperate, and I will never get out. Or if I will get out, I will be broken by that moment mentally and physically. There were, of course, threats of sexual violence and electric shock and beatings. Some quite painful. But the options were explained. Or I sign a confession and then I'm exchanged in 2 months.
And you never signed a confession?
I have. I
Okay,
have. Yeah, well, when you are told that, I knew that they can do it.
Okay.
I knew that they can do it. They told us bluntly several times, no one has access to you. No one knows where you are, but even if they do, they don't have access to you. They don't know your conditions or anything, so we can do to you whatever we want. We are responsible just to our commanders, and they gave us free hand. So I knew pretty well that they can break any person physically and mentally, even if later on they release that person, he or she will never be the same human being again. And one of our priorities, as we've put it, not the ultimate one, but one of the most important ones, was to stay alive and as much as possible waiting for the release. So this is when I signed the confession. And all the cases which I've encountered later were similar. Because apparently we were all accused of targeting civilian population, and all of our supposed victims had injuries from blasts. For instance, I, according to my interrogators, torturers, shot at 2 ladies in Severodonetsk, town of Severodonetsk, from RPG launcher. For no reason. I just saw them, and being sane and sound, I decided to kill them for no particular reason. And I missed. But they were injured. Apparently they were ill, and they were really injured. Later on, I realized what was done. Russian army, taking over villages and towns, started with barraging them with their artillery. And when they finally took them over, they found civilians injured by their own fire and put the blame upon Ukrainian POWs. So it was win-win situation. They kind of were stripped of responsibility, and they received Ukrainian war criminals, whom they could parade around, showing them as war criminals.
How's your mental health?
I would say in there it was fine. I had a lot of mental practices, mostly found intuitively. But then I kind of stick to them. I realized few things which are important. I was never bored. I was never bored, even if we were not given books, and reading is very important to me, or newspapers. Well, paper, pen, of course we didn't have it. We didn't have toilet paper. We couldn't cut our fingernails because we were not given anything to do it with. We had to scratch them against the wall to shorten them. And, people are quite inventive anyway, so they can find their way around circumstances. But I had a lot of thinking, reflection practices. I composed texts in my head in Ukrainian and Russian and English because I was really afraid to lose my working language, which is English. I was so afraid, I can't even tell you. And also suddenly, for instance, my long-forgotten French started to come back to me as well, which was a real surprise. I thought I've lost it for good, but no. I composed prayers of my own.
You did all this while you were in captivity.
Yeah, well, because I kept myself busy, and also I had a lot of systemic reflections upon concepts related to our circumstances, on violence, on death, on pain, on life, on love, on hope. And I was always busy. In one of the cells, I started to teach English, and actually we've made quite a lot of progress, again, with no text and paper and pen. And I've never taught any language before. It turned out to be very interesting.
Okay. Are those guys able to have some basic conversation in English now?
At the end, well, in 2 months and something, my best student could really do that.
Did the Russians know you were doing this?
No.
Okay.
No, we tried to keep it low.
Okay.
Because that would be kind of too much. They asked me, my co-inmates, to give them lectures. So I said, not with my memory, but I said, whatever to keep us busy, just do it. So yes, it was on history of religions, it was on contemporary concept of human rights, it was on the notion of asylum, it was on history of philosophy, ancient Greek philosophy and early Christian philosophy.
I asked you a question. I'm sorry. I asked you about your mental health, and I appreciate this story, and I want to listen to it even more. It's just 'cause, one, I wasn't expecting all of this context. It's wonderful. When I was asking you about your mental health, I'm asking about you now.
Okay.
But I'm happy you said everything you said, but I'm just, because you went through this very traumatic experience, and, being in Ukraine for 16 years, I know that people, just the society in general, is open to this concept, I should go to a therapist or I need to go to a professional, because even not being a soldier, I have so many friends who say they're just going mad because of these airstrikes.
Right.
And the sound of terror is, when you listen to these shaheeds, it's the explosion, obviously, but just the sound, because we all know what that sound is like. And that in itself is terrorism, and it can really mess with your head. And I have conversations every day, and people medicate themselves in very different ways. They find some marijuana. They do all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but as somebody who's literally tortured, you says you were treated better than most, but you were still tortured. I'm just curious about leaving that experience alive and losing soldiers, and you have this caring heart about yourself because you are a human rights activist. You come out of that alive, but there are so many other people who didn't. I just want to know, emotionally, how are you coping with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
No. It's important. I'm happy you told me. It was just
it's just if not keeping myself busy, I think right upon my release, I would be in much worse mental health situation that I was. But we went straight on rehabilitation program for a couple of weeks, for 4 weeks actually. And we were told by one of the guys who cared about us, a military who also was in captivity, that, of course, it's very individual, but guys, please keep in mind that the toughest part might come around within 3 months, not right now when you are released, but within 3 months or 6 months. Actually, it is a long process. Don't think about it as right now you have these 4 weeks and you'll be fine. And he was right. He was right. I'm officially now, I even have a paper in English. I'm officially diagnosed with PTSD, but I mean, half of the country has it, I think, in different forms. I have a therapy, of course. Yeah, I have a therapist and I go through therapy. I am prescribed medication for like supportive one, for anxiety and flashbacks and sleeping disorder and mood swings. You know, these things, which are very common for all POWs and all captives. Otherwise, I think I'm fine, really. Although first 2-3 months were the happiest. And then when this euphoria of being free started to kind of not die down, but go to norm, turned into norm, there becomes it becomes more difficult.
You've been free for 8 months. It's not even a year.
It's not.
It's not even a year. So you're still new to this freedom. You've been in captivity more than you've been free.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I could just imagine this being really difficult for you. Before I move on, I want to ask you, how do you feel Ukrainian society welcomes POWs? You know, like, is it challenging talking to people who have not gone through that experience? Because I'm really interested, because you're a very public person and you do talks and you're on TV a lot, but beyond dealing with soldiers and just talking with the common person who has no context at all about what you're experiencing, because I assume you're more so around kind of regular folk as opposed to your fellow soldiers. What is that like?
In captivity, of course, we were told by our guards that since we are POWs, when we are back, we'll be treated like traitors. Of course, they try to undermine our morale. I never believed it, but some of our guys did. And still, I had my fears or my, let's say, worries. That's better one about the reception here. I'm really touched most of the times, with one or two minor exceptions, but vast majority of the times, every person I talk to, when he or she realizes that I'm a former POW, a lot of them start to get really emotional. I've seen, people who started to cry when they realized that I was in captivity, that they're talking to someone who was recently, especially in the first several months, recently released. And they try to kind of show that they welcome you, that they appreciate. And this is what is really important for me.
This isn't your first time against Russia per se, as in, you know, the empire that we know as Russia. As a boy, essentially, you took part in this nonviolent strike. It's called the Revolution on Granite. It's back in 1990. You had to be about 12 or 13 or something like that. And so I think it's important to talk about that experience, because people that I think there are a lot of people out there that assume that this is just some civil war between brothers and that the West involved themselves in this, and that's what made Russia attack you and all this kind of BS. But you are, as a boy, were fighting this Moscow colonial rule. And I just want to know about what motivated you at such a young age to join this well-known strike that ultimately was the beginning stages of Ukraine breaking away from the Soviet Union.
As a boy, as a child, I was raised in late Soviet Union times. I was a Soviet kid. And I was a good Soviet kid. I really was honored to be a member of this youngest communist organization, which was called Octoberists. It was for kids of 7, 8, 9 years old, something like that. And then I was a young pioneer, also a member of pioneer organization. I was quite proud because we were told that, and I appreciated it, that we are building the most humane system and society in the world where there is no injustice, there is no exploitation, and where it is based on mutual help and solidarity. Well, apparently the word freedom was somehow absent from that vocabulary, but otherwise, these were good things until the moment I started to realize that I treasure freedom. And even when they used the word freedom, they had their freedom in their vocabulary, well, in their dictionaries, it was different notion of it than in my. And second, that what we are told and what they do are sometimes just opposite things, that it is all huge lie, it is a hypocrisy. And
what's the biggest hypocrisy that you saw?
Well, it was an extremely unjust society in the first place. It was not based on mutual help, but the main thing was that, well, I think injustice was something that really, really made me angry. And I started to realize to what extent fear is one of the ruling engines of this society. There were several incidents in my childhood which I didn't understand at the time. But then, when I grew up a little bit, and I realized that what I came across was fear. For instance, I remember after one of the Secretary Generals of the Communist Party, a former KGB chief, Yuri Andropov, passed away. And I told my teacher in the school that I overheard my parents talking to each other, mentioning him, that he started to stir things, like to do harsh things, and what happens now, really, and how it is reflected upon our lives. And my teacher listened to me and said, "Okay, have you told it to anyone?" I said, "No, not yet." He said, "Listen," and teacher was a good person, apparently. "Listen, don't tell anyone. Let it be our secret, between me and you. You know, we'll have common secret." And of course, as a kid, I was like, this big person wants to have a common... But I couldn't understand why. After several years, I realized that he knew if I tell it to someone else and it comes to KGB, my parents will be at least taken for a conversation what they do. And also things related to identity also surprised me because, for instance, I studied in Ukrainian school in Kiev, but it was called Ukrainian because out of 4 classes, A, B, C, D, only A studied in Ukrainian. And it was enough to be called Ukrainian. The neighboring school was Russian. No one studied in Ukrainian. I couldn't get my head around it. We are in Ukraine. Why do they do it?
Even as a young boy, you realize this. Okay.
Yes, and I was bilingual since my childhood. Even if Kiev was at the time predominantly Russian-speaking city, I spoke both Russian and Ukrainian.
I have to stop you. I want to ask you about this because we interviewed a couple of kids that escaped Donetsk. One of the girl escaped literally in April, so she was fresh out of Donetsk. But what they said to me was fascinating. Even as children, they said that when 2014 happened, they knew that it was wrong, and they were maybe 8 years old or something like that. And what was really tough was that was just astonishing for me was that they literally were fighting their parents, right? And they had to tell their parents, "No, you're like." They're kind of battling with their parents, like, "No, you're wrong." And I just can't process that in that environment. And interestingly enough, in addition to Ukrainian, they were speaking to me in English because the girl, she did a better job. She understood it more than the guy, her friend that she was with. But and then the woman, Marta, she said that she had to get a passport when she was 15 in order to get medical care. And she said, "This is my passport to leave." So when you made this conscious decision that, hey, I'm going to be bilingual, I still think that's something, that's an incredible adult decision to make when you're a child, because you had to be about 7 to 8 around this time, because we were talking about, and Yuri Andropov, because that was like the mid 80s or something.
Yeah. But also have to give all of my gratitude to my father, who was a member of the Communist Party, but at the same time he was very conscious about his background, where he comes from, and that he comes from central Ukraine, from Cherkasy region. And he wanted me to know who I am and what my people's culture is and what my people's language is and music, etc. So I think by the standards of the Communist Party, he was a bourgeois nationalist. But well, of course he was not, but he really contributed a lot to my identity. And then when I started to realize the scale of hypocrisy the whole system is built upon, I've joined the anti-communist movement, anti-Soviet movement. It was an organization called Union of Independent Ukrainian Youth. And I could not be a member because I was too young, according to their statute. But then Revolution in Granite came. We organized a strike in our school. And I made this speech at the rally at the Central Square. And I was accepted as a member of that organization because after all that, they said there is an exception to every rule. I somehow, these were turbulent times. We've seen that basically we were dismantling empire we were born in. I think I am a part of a fortunate generation because we could choose what country we want to live in, what language is our mother tongue, what our beliefs are, what we think about our borders, but primarily about our values. What society do we want to build? Of course, many things never materialized, but we could have the choice, and we were probably one of the first generations in a century, or a bit less, who could make this choice. And this choice is something now the descendants of that empire try to take away from us, but we won't let them.
Yeah, I think, ultimately, as we know, Ukraine became independent along with the other 14 colonies. I like to call them colonies of Russia. But we ascribe that term to the continent of Africa for a whole bunch. I'll ask you about that, as we close out. But, with somebody who has this experience of being a youth leader and being a soldier and being in an occupation, how does it feel to hear Western leaders talk about negotiations with Russia?
It is difficult. Well, not because it's about negotiations per se. Every war ends with negotiations unless one of the parties is completely eliminated. So there will be negotiations. It is unavoidable, and they should take place. Otherwise, it depends on what we mean by negotiations. Too often, part of Western leaders say that we should have peace negotiations in order to exchange part of the territories, for instance, for a peace or something. And to me, it means that they don't really understand what's going on. Russia doesn't need territory. It doesn't know what to do with its own territory. It's too big. And we are used to think that wars are waged primarily for the resources. Would it be natural resources or land or markets or water or whatever? And this one is exceptional, definitely, because there is nothing in Ukraine Russia needs so desperately to get engaged into such a mayhem. But this is a war for symbolic resources and political ones. This is a war of values. This is a war of worldviews. Russia wants to be an empire. It is said more or less openly now. And there was never in history Russian empire without Ukraine being part of it.
Yeah.
So it is about values, and it means that this war is not a Russian-Ukrainian story. We share values, I believe, at least, with many countries and peoples around the globe who believe in human agency, who treasure human dignity, and think that people can have a voice and can have a choice. At least to an extent possible. And this is something opposite to the ideology of the Russian world, where the state is everything and human beings are basically material for the state. I
don't think people look at them that way, though. I think that I agree with you. One of the things that I do when I discuss Ukraine, this whole dynamic, is exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. However, I think that a lot of the discourse is Russia, listening to Western leaders talk about this, also these same Western leaders who have a say in whether Ukraine becomes a NATO member or, a member of the European Union. This whole conversation about something that a peace, right? And I don't like using the word peace because it suggests that both parties are complicit, and they aren't. I don't like using the word peace negotiation because it wasn't Ukraine that broke a peace, right? But I think people feel like there's this magic bullet that'll make Putin stop. And I'm trying to find the language to make the argument that he won't. However, I think what you're saying is perfectly correct. I think people just refuse to accept it.
That's my feeling too.
Yeah.
I had several advocacy trips around the EU, and I visited the United States this January before Donald Trump's inauguration. Mm-hmm. And yes, from certain conversations, I had the feeling that it's not that people don't realize it, but they don't want to acknowledge it. Because if they do, suddenly what they perceive or want to perceive as certain distant Russian-Ukrainian story, where they can even sympathize with the underdog, but it's not them in the picture. But when you acknowledge it, suddenly you are in the picture, and it's not some distant war. You are involved, and they are involved. They just don't. And the problem for me, the problem is that when it comes to European leaders, they will realize it sooner or later, but they can do it a better way or harsher way. And if they don't want to acknowledge it now, I'm afraid sooner or later they might have theirs 24th of February, whatever date it could be, and learn it hard way. And I really don't want to see that.
I don't think people realize that it can happen. I think people look at it as particular Americans, we got our oceans, and our sense of security is vastly different. So when I talk about NATO, first, even when I talk about security, America, as you know, is such a diverse country with so many diverse populations. Our sense of security and our needs are just vastly different. I mean, beyond talking about global security, we're thinking, we got Trump who's using the federal government agencies as his Gestapo, quite frankly, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's an immediate security threat to a lot of Americans, and police violence compared to what's going on, compared to this military issue and this colonial genocidal conquest of Russia. And so I think that this threat is also something that's legitimate for us, but I don't think people really are not going to really see it until it actually happens, because they think, they will never attack us, even though Russia has, even from an asymmetrical standpoint, they're doing it, right? But I think there's a psychology of, unless there's a T-90 rolling around in Brooklyn, then I don't have a problem.
Well, I understand this worldview, but the thing is also that, what really surprised me, that so many people, as I said, perceive it as some distant Russian-Ukrainian story, while Russian propaganda television for years, every day, and I was witness to it. I had to watch it, not when I was with POWs, but when I was convicted in the criminal part of a prison, and then later on in the colony. Every night propaganda show, the main one, and other propaganda shows on Russian TV repeat once and again that this is not a war with Ukraine. That this is, well, Ukraine does not exist in their worldview. So they are fighting for more than 3 years like no one. Um, this is a war against, as they say, degraded liberal West, which has forgotten what real traditional values are, and that Russian soldier is so ready to remind them. And they continue to say it every day on all their TV channels, and then you arrive to the West, and the West is like, no, we haven't heard it. No, it's not our story. We're not in the picture. Well, Russians don't think so. And apparently it is more important what Russians think. But also, it's not only about, again, territory. It is about values, but it is also about dismantling international institutions and international humanitarian law and international human rights law. They really, I think, consciously and on purpose try to dismantle what remains of security system set up after the Second World War, as inefficient and sometimes lame it was, but it was there. But they want to dismantle it and to replace it with the simple might makes right world. And I'm afraid that so far they managed to do it at least partly. They rendered Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe inefficient. They paralyzed the UN as an institution designed to keep international peace. They gagged International Committee of the Red Cross. And all these guys in these institutions, they seem to be kind of fine with it. So it basically turns the world into jungle. Maybe it doesn't mean anything in particular, or it doesn't seem to be practically important in Brooklyn. But apparently, when the world turns into jungle, jungle is everywhere.
Right. We are partners in the same dialogue. I totally agree with you. I'm really want to talk to you. A couple more questions before we close out. Is what a post-war environment looks like for Ukraine. And I want to talk about NATO and the European Union because I'll let you. I think as somebody who's an anti-militarist, I'm really curious if if you believe that Ukraine belongs in NATO, which is the vast majority of people, according to all the polling, want, and it's actually one of the made-up kind of reasons why Russia invaded. What are your thoughts about that?
Many years ago, I was holding more expected, probably views, more expected from someone calling himself anti-militarist. Actually, most of Ukrainians at the beginning of 90s, soon after independence of Ukraine was gained, really wanted Ukraine to be some sort of Switzerland of Eastern Europe, to be neutral, to be friendly to everyone, to be this kind of nice country. But apparently, in order to be friendly to everyone, everyone has to be friendly as well, at least. Now I believe that Ukraine either should get a NATO membership or, if not, then to have proper alliances with military alliances with its partners internationally. It is about security guarantees because actually when we talk about peace negotiations, the notion of peace or notion of cessation of aggression, if there are no practical, technical security guarantees, not like Budapest Memorandum infamous or a Minsk agreement or whatever, But what happens if Russia continues its assault? Who will come to help us practically? Not to say, well, we are extremely concerned, but like whose boys and girls will fight alongside our boys and girls to defend our common values and our alliances? This is what we need to know. Otherwise, if there are no technical guarantees, there will be no peace. Peace won't last. Russia will just wait until it will be able to gather more resources and regroup its forces and continue its assault, maybe on more vicious and bloody scale. So this is why I do believe that, yes, we need NATO membership, but NATO should be efficient. The Article 5 should be a working clause, not something we are not sure will we be using it or not. It should be efficient, working alliance, or we have to make alliances of our own. But of course, we need the goodwill of our partners for that.
How do you talk with other people, like leftists in the West, who you would ideally share a lot of world values with, but when it comes to NATO, it feels like there's just major thing where they focus more on the West, because unfortunately we know that the whole point about anti-militarism, which that's a component of who I am as a person, but I support NATO, right? Precisely because of the reasons that you're bringing up. I think at least with America, for example, entering wars, starting wars that never should start, like Iraq, is a major mistake. I think that there are many people in our past leadership who are war criminals, to be quite blunt with you. I believe that. And I believe that there's an equity in how people who are considered war criminals, like Putin is definitely a war criminal. However, it focuses on the continent of Africa too much. Our international justice system does not really target aggression from Western countries that use militarism first, that have their own history of colonialism, which they have not really taken stock of and ownership of. And so from that sense, yes, I believe in, for example, cutting military, not cutting defense, but making it more efficient so that if we focus on things in America like healthcare and access and those types of things. And so, but I think that with a lot of progressive leftist people, there's this anti-NATO sentiment, not because of those reasons primarily, but because I feel like there's this idea that they hang on to this Russian propaganda that of it being this country of freedom and equality, even though their whole project was colonial, right? That's what people don't like. Their whole project was colonial. People actually think that this big ass country that includes Siberia, which is pretty much full of Asians, the ones that are left because throughout their empire they killed them. Like no one thinks about this, right? Literally, like the whole Soviet Russian project is not only like they have internalized colonialism that comes from violence and mass murder. There are some of the biggest mass murderers in human history. In human history. Yet, in these circles, this whole conversation of this is a country of equality and land of it blows my mind.
Yeah,
like
it was like yesterday I was attending a public event with a friend and colleague of mine, a human rights activist and educator from South California, and he said that when he's seen during the No Kings Day and protests, or he's seen certain anti-deportation rally, and he noticed someone wearing a T-shirt with Soviet symbols. And he was like, you are at anti-deportation rally. Do you actually realize that the state whose symbols are upon you deported nations, like peoples, in dozens and hundreds of thousands, just deported it? It's like coming to anti-fascist action wearing swastika or something, and really understand that a lot of people don't really understand, don't see it. But overall, I should say that there is a trend which really makes me uncomfortable, or not uncomfortable, but worries me. There are some uh, non-authoritarian left-wing thinkers who were at some point in time quite important for a number of people I know, and for me including. And currently, what they say and what they do is extremely disappointing because, for instance, they are anti-imperialists, and they are used so for such a long time to protest American imperialism that basically they replaced anti-imperialism with anti-Americanism, and they don't notice, because they don't want to, I believe, that they are supporting another imperialism, which is Russian. And they have this automatic kind of almost reflex: everything supported by the US is bad, because it's, it is American imperialism in motion. And everyone who is against the US might be at least neutral or maybe our friend. And then you have this worldview, which is so different from the reality we live in. The problem is, my problem is that when they talk about freedom and solidarity and liberation potential of peoples, suddenly, when it comes to nations like Ukraine, not big ones like Russians or Americans, they deny Ukraine its own agency. They deny Ukrainians to be able to influence their plight. They talk about NATO enlargement to the Russian borders as if there is a desert here and NATO just came in. No, people wanted to join this alliance. People in Eastern Europe, people in Baltic states, now people in Ukraine, for very obvious reason. They didn't want to see Russian soldier coming and taking away their freedom and their possessions and maybe their lives. And they don't talk about what Ukrainians want, or Estonians, or Czechs. They talk in terms of big empires who are competing. Are you really left-wing? I want to ask. Why do you deny agency of the people? Why do you talk imperial language at the end of the day? Trying to criticize empires. And it is really disappointing because left-wing tradition, with part of it I'm interested in, part of it I don't agree with, but during the last century it produced very interesting intellectual fruits. But now I see that a lot of it degraded into conspiracy theories. And yes, this simple anti-Americanism, at the end of the day, becoming servants of Russian propaganda in Russian informational warfare. And I talk about people whom I really kind of respected and who really brought a lot to my worldview, like Noam Chomsky, for instance, and some other guys. And it is a really sad story for me.
I think that a lot of, I'll tell you one angle of this why people don't give Ukrainians and the Estonians other agency. I think a lot of it, they just view us as a bunch of white people. And there's just an assumed privilege that comes with like whiteness. And I explain to people that the way that we view whiteness in the United States, like whiteness does not speak to the Ukrainian story. Mm-hmm. That's the bottom line, right? White does not describe the centuries of Ukraine's proximity to Russia at all, right? It just doesn't. And I don't know, I think some of it is, I think it kind of helps me being the black person that kind of takes on this thing. It's kind of interesting for them because I live here, and I take time to understand the history and understand the knowledge of it, right? But once you get outside these think tank communities and you just start talking to common people, that's where the questions really start kicking in, right? When you start having genuine conversations with people. Because I think one of the worst things, I won't say worst, I think what needs to be done is to talk more outside of these circles as opposed to talking to the usual suspects, because people in my neighborhood, my mostly black Brooklyn neighborhood, have these same questions. Terrell, the whole conversation, like, aren't there a bunch of white people? Like, that's where the real knowledge and conversation start. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell them, no, this is not true. And I think there are a lot of people who really do have their minds open to that. Like, they genuinely do. But I think what's also what I think does a disservice to Ukraine is that there's not enough ethnic diversity just in the intellectual space to talk about Ukraine. Because I was just with a delegation of African journalists that were organized by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And I spent a little time with them before, and I'm going to talk with them as soon as I leave here in more detail. But you could tell that there's this openness, and there's a problem that they're not engaged enough. But, you know, these people like the continent of Africa, Black Americans, for example, who by percentage support Ukraine or support candidates that would be Ukraine friendly than anyone else. I remember talking to I was invited to to moderate a panel by this German American organization. And the guy said something to me like it was racist, but he didn't realize it was racist. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know, and this is just a whole room where it's only 2 Black people in the room, right? And I'm one of them. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of the people who's paneling like this conversation, you know, with ambassadors, et cetera, because I have this knowledge of American politics and Ukraine and understanding EU. He was saying that there is a concern about Europeans, about America losing its Europeanness. And he said that because we are losing this Europeanness, you know, with the diversity of America, basically saying that the more browning that the country's getting, the more European values that we're losing, and that's going to be bad for Europe and Ukraine. And I was waiting on someone to say something because it was like the way he said it. Again, I don't think that he was trying to be racist. I don't think he was, but it very much was. And so I had to be the one at the end of my panel to let him know that the people who care about Europe and the relationship of NATO and the European Union are the 90% of Black people that supported Joe Biden and consequently Kamala Harris. And the vast majority of people, those quote-unquote Europeans that you're talking about, that fear of losing your European values, voted for Trump, somebody who doesn't give a fuck about any of this shit, right? And so, like, you have I was telling the audience, like, you have a fidelity to the wrong people, and these people who voted for Trump, they don't see themselves as your fellow European brethren at all. And I just think the way that but again, like me being a Black American and seeing the hypocrisy in my own country, and then coming over here and looking at it from this perspective, not just only being educated, you know, about Ukraine, but also realizing that the Western Europeans, when the European Union was expanding, they treated y'all kind of like, oh God, look at these horde of Western Europe, like Eastern Europeans. They stereotyped you too, right? And so we need to have this type of context and conversations because we break this. Like, I think that the Black audiences that I talk to, I'm like, y'all think this whole white Black thing, like it applies in many instances, but it confuses you in the other because it doesn't apply to these Ukrainians, these Bulgarians, these Georgians, or anything. It just doesn't apply. Right. And so the main problem, I think, is just a lack of diversity of people in the room. Because if you have more diversity in people in the room, and I know that we kind of talk about it as being superficial, but I think it's vital. Mm-hmm. Like, the more diversity of thoughts you have in the room, because the Black civil rights movement and justice movements may have been led by people and consequently benefits Black people, but overall, there's no exclusion in it. Right. There's not any exclusion in Black movements in the United States of America. It never has been. It's always been one where we just want to exist with everyone else and everyone is welcome, right? And because of that, that's the perspective I bring. That's how I help to really explain Ukraine. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I can come in from my very Black 90% city, you know, Detroit, Michigan, where I was born and raised, and come over here and I can see everything because I've had to see everything. Mm-hmm. I don't have this privilege of not seeing the worst of my country. Mm-hmm. I don't. And so when that guy from this CEO of this German American Association said that America is losing its European connection, I'm like, that's not helping Ukraine. Yeah. It's not helping you all, because this guy in this room of people who are saying, oh, you're right. I'm like, no, you're actually being screwed and you don't even know it. and then you got me up in here, being like this one person just kind of agitating. But I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. After the war started in 2014, there was one point or one topic. A lot of Ukrainian media, not all of them, unfortunately, but some of them, have found perfectly common ground with Russian media, which was coverage of migration processes in the EU. You remember that was time when a lot of people came in. And some of the coverage was extremely xenophobic, of
I
course.
remember I was here in 2009 when I saw it, and Ukraine was a different place.
Yep, yep. So, and I remember in one of or two of the pieces, opinions published by certain media, it was about these hordes which flood our European cities. And I'm like, your European cities, do you actually know what the inhabitants of those our European cities treat you, like Ukrainians? Because I know, I've been there, and also migration is my specialty, migration and human rights. So, yeah, it was about the same, like Europeans, no, you are looking the wrong way. And I really hope that, it changes, and I hope it will change also because I truly believe and I really hope that we will change Ukrainian migration policy after the war ends. We had a pretty dysfunctional asylum system, at least before Maidan, and even after it is very problematic. We have, or used to have, quite xenophobic migration policy and quite a weird one. But now, for I think number of reasons, starting with cynically, economic and demographic reasons, we'll need people who want to come and stay and learn language and work and sustain our country.
From where?
I believe, from where they want and can. Because I see all those notions that we need in the first place to involve people who are more culturally close to us, but it leads us, I think, very tricky way. Who defines who is closer to me? My former compatriots who now at the front line, I mean those from the occupied territories who believe in Russian world and are now killing my other compatriots for Russia in the front line, they are not culturally close to me. They are not at all. And ending with, the basic respect towards human rights, including rights for freedom of movement, and also gratitude, because before I had this feeling that most of Ukrainians perceive asylum and refugees as some, again, not our story, some distant one. But now when we have several millions of Ukrainians in other countries being refugees of war, and they could find shelter there and temporary protection thanks to the others, I think we have a debt to pay. I think we have a debt of gratitude to be paid to those who find themselves in situations where they risk their lives and freedom. And if they can and want to come and apply for asylum, we should treat them as humans and as we are treated now. So I think it is important to remember.
On that note, I just have to ask you, because I really think that a lot of these, this country has fewer than 30 million people, which is a significant drop from the 43 or 44 million people before, like even 2014, right? When you think about the migrations, everything, but especially after 2022, demographers are already looking at the numbers and, the low birth rates, all of these things, and they're saying basically a lot of the people are going to, the countries that will have the desire to come are people from the continent of Africa, countries from the continent of Africa, from Asia, and from the Middle East. I remember talking to, I've talked to a few people over the years about this, and they don't like it. Mm-hmm. Their whole thing is we want more people from Europe. And I said, for the Frenchman from the south of France, from Caen or the Italian, they're not coming here in droves They just aren't. And again, it is no disrespect to Ukraine. I live here. I love it, but they're not going to be, hundreds of thousands of Americans coming to Ukraine. The people who are going to really want to come here and see this as an opportunity are going to come from these places that many people here, quite frankly, have very stereotypical and racist views about.
Yep, right, exactly. But, many people underestimate that for the majority, the decision to radically change the place of residence is a difficult decision.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult decision. Yeah. So there should be an incentive, really important and serious, for someone to just go and come to Ukraine. Yeah. If they lead the life they more or less like in their home country, only adventurers will just want to come and just have a look maybe. But if this is a country to live, and the country which is developing itself, and a country with human environment and more respect towards human dignity, people from less human-friendly environments will come as a rule. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are a lot of racist stereotypes about those places and people who live in there, but I hope that the more diverse Ukrainian society becomes, the less will be room for stereotypes, like racist stereotypes.
How I'm optimistic about that, because you've seen this country evolve. Because I'll first start off by saying that Ukraine is a vastly different country, in my experience, when it comes to that than it was in 2009. So, for example, I haven't been stopped by police. I don't have to worry about them. When I came as a student in 2009, I was constantly stopped. The first day, I had 10 different apartment owners refuse to rent to me because I'm black. I had a whole conversation where the real estate agents were trying to sell my Americanness. Oh, this guy is going to bring his dollars, and then they just kept pushing. Is he black? Is he black? Is he black? I don't really. I have that story, right? And then I was constantly stopped by police who ultimately backed off when they realized that I was an American under a U.S. program, and they were worried about the State Department, And so because I was under a State Department grant, that the cops just right there with this whole thing, right? They were just scared. But I think that this Ukraine, for me, it's a vastly better place, and a lot of my black friends, African friends, say the same thing. I feel very comfortable and safe here. It's one of the reasons why I'm like such a cheerleader for the place. I just personally love the place, so I have that hope. I absolutely have that hope, and I'm just curious, as somebody who's a human rights defender, somebody who's actually been doing the work to help pave the way for asylum seekers. What kind of confidence do you have that your country that you fought for, will evolve into a country that, quite frankly, has an opportunity to not make the same type of mistakes as other European countries have, because that's ultimately what people are asking for. Ukraine is in a very unique position where they can integrate into the European political structures, but don't have the history of colonialism and don't have this history of imperialism. You're in this ripe moment where you can set your own path.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I do believe it. I hope for it. And this is something, also something we're fighting for. Physically, I don't really like to underline something being European, but if we talk about European political system and European structures, at least when they are explained, it is insisted upon that they are based upon certain set of values. And apparently Ukraine now fights for these values tooth and nail, while we see in many other European countries the rise of the political forces opposing these values, like the far-right populist parties, etc. So it is not surprising for me when now I hear sometimes more and more often that the most European country of Europe is now Ukraine, because it drives certain things, it reminds what is important. And also, I believe that, my second area of work, not only forced migration and asylum and human rights, but of activity was discrimination and racism, hate crimes and ethnic profiling. We actually, about 2009, 2008, started to deal with the issue of ethnic profiling or racial profiling among police force.
Do you know Johnson Anarchy, Dr. Johnson Anarchy?
Yes, of course.
So we know the same. Yeah.
Of course I do. Of course I do. So, but currently, what is very obvious for everyone in Ukraine, but I'm not sure to what extent it is obvious to people abroad, we live through a terrible tragedy in Ukraine, which also is some sort of epic times. Epic in terms of we have real heroes, people who are ready or were ready, because they are not in this world anymore, to sacrifice so much for common good, for common values, for some fundamentals we are building our lives upon. And among these people, one can find people of very different political views. You can see right and left, even those who hated each other, fighting at the same front line. You can see people of different ethnicities. One of the, there is a brilliant organization which emerged when I was in captivity, which provides legal assistance to military personnel, called NGO called Princip. It is founded by two people, and one of them is Maksym Butkevych, who was badly injured at the front line, being a prominent lawyer. He went voluntarily, joined the armed forces. He was terribly injured at the front line. He's lost one of his eyes. And he is a hero. And he is treated as hero by everyone who knows him. And he is ethnic Pushto.
I know his sister Miriam.
And yes, and also you can see people of different sexual orientations and gender identities, and they are all fighting for our country. After this, to show disrespect or to practice discrimination, at least for a certain period of time after the war ends, is much more difficult or next to impossible. How can you distinguish people based on their ethnicity or skin color when they defended you? Hey, listen, shut up. This is maybe the mildest thing any person who would pronounce discrimination would hear. So it also gives me hope that Ukraine will be able to get out of this. It is the best case scenario. I know that life doesn't work this way usually, but I think my hope is quite well grounded.
I'm pretty hopeful as well. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Terrell.